The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now. Welcome back. You're listening to Across the Border. It's our Prophecy Reality Edition, and we're going to continue with our topic here. The identity of the last ruling head of the Revelation sea beast, with the little horn of Daniel's fourth beast, with St. Paul's man of sin, and with St. John's Antichrist. Okay, well, I guess I'll continue with our good friend E.B. Elliott. And like I said, this comes from Volume 3 of our quincentennial, Reformation Quincentennial Edition that we are publishing and not published yet. But you can find that text up to the point that we are at horeapocalypticae.wordpress.com. Spread it around. It's a good resource for you there. Okay, let's see. It's remarkable, however, that there is one important characteristic noticed in Daniel's description beyond what is found in the Revelation, namely that of three of the original 10 horns of the beast being subdued and plucked up before the little horn. That's true. We don't find that in the Revelation. We only find that in the book of Daniel. There's also this additional explanatory intimation given in Daniel, of which use may perhaps be made to the illustration of the apocalyptic vision, whereas a fourth or Roman beast, on final deprivation of power, was to be burned in fire and utterly destroyed, and that's called perdition. The fourth beast goes to perdition. Okay? So whenever you see that term goes to perdition, that means that's the beast that's going to be destroyed upon Christ's coming. Okay, identity of the beasts of Daniel in the Revelation, or rather the last ruling horn or head of one and the other, with the anti-Christian power described in St. Paul's famous prophecy in the epistle to the Thessalonians, one to which we've already more than once made reference, but a fuller sketch of that on the present occasion to recapitulate will be both interesting and necessary. It appears then that partly in consequence of the unauthorized assertions, as if by inspiration of certain members of the Thessalonian church, partly of some forged words or letters ascribed to St. Paul, and partly to, I doubt not, from misconstruction of the words which he had really written in his first epistle about Christ coming again to gather himself to his saints, both quick and dead. I mean those in which he used the first person of Christians that would be alive at the Lord's coming. From these causes, I say, the impression had arisen, and with no little excitement or feeling attending it, that Christ's second advent was imminent, or may it even have happened, insomuch that the then existing generation might soon expect to see it. In answer to this, he here tells the Thessalonian Christians that it was not so immediately at hand as they supposed, and while not attempting to unveil to them the times and seasons, which he himself indeed knew not, and which the Father kept in his own power, he yet, under dictation of the Spirit, declares to them that before that great and blessed consummation there was to be developed in the church one particular and most extraordinary phenomenon of apostasy. You get that? There was to be developed before the consummation in the church one particular and most extraordinary phenomenon of apostasy. Now, if you're a historicist, you know this has already taken place. There was, in history, already developed and still existing, one particular and most extraordinary phenomenon of apostasy, and we call that the Roman Catholic Church. Meeting all of the criteria of the Scripture itself. That's how we identify it. In effect, the apostasy from the church, one true faith specially predicted by the Spirit, which had even then begun and would span the whole interval from then until the Lord's second coming. He further notes prominently how it would be in due course issue in and develop as its head a certain anti-Christian person, succession, or power with whom he designates as the man of sin, the lawless one, then the son of perdition. The man of sin as preeminently sin's offspring and patron, the lawless one as above all laws, the son of perdition, both as the antitype, it might seem, of Judas, whose distinctive title alone it was previously, in his character of a traitor, apostle, or bishop, and as also, like him, in some preeminent manner doomed to destruction. Respecting this mysterious person or power, the following further particulars were also stated: that the mystery of iniquity was even then working, which was ultimately to issue in his development, but that a certain particular hindrance then existed in some person or power. I use the double designation because it is spoken of alike in the masculine and the neuter gender, and that what that hindrance was, they knew. And on its removal, but not before, this man of sin, the lawless one and head of the apostasy, would be revealed. That these three things would be the sign of and accompaniment of his revelation: lying wonders and miracles, a complete deceivableness of unrighteousness, or exhibition of sin speciously and deceitfully as if religion, and an energy of power and success such as the working of Satan might alone account for, and which would draw in all to believe in it, except those that took pleasure in the truth and would be saved. The impiety and pride of this man of sin were thus predicted, that he would be preeminently an opposer to Christ and his church, that he would exalt himself above all that was called God or an object of worship, above the gods many and lords many in the Gentile heaven of earth, and that means the governing bodies of earth, including the potentates and kings of this world, and he would sit in God's temple, a phrase here meaning the church apparently, as often elsewhere, and actually there exhibit himself as God. Finally, the apostle described the end of this man of sin, how that he would be consumed by the breath of Christ's mouth and destroyed even to annihilation by the brightness of his coming. Evidently meaning that second coming of which he had twice before spoken, the same of which the resurrection of the dead saints and the gathering around Christ alike of these and of such as might be living at the time were to be the blessed accompaniments. I have observed on the apostle's statement that the Thessalonian Christians knew what the hindrance was that prevented the development of this man of sin. And we have the consenting testimony of the early fathers, from Irenaeus, the disciple of St. John, down to Chrysostom and Jerome, to the effect that it was understood to be the imperial power ruling and residing at Rome. And assuming this to be correct, which we have indeed good reason to do, for how could so extraordinary a point of knowledge, once received from the apostle, have become lost in the age immediately succeeding? The following striking similarities between this anti-Christian power, and the little horn of Daniel, or its equivalent beast from the abyss and sea, will at once present themselves. 1. The former, like the latter, seem to be a power that would reign at Rome. Else what the need of the imperial government? Seated when Paul wrote at Rome, being removed out of the way in order to its development. 2. It was to succeed to power soon after the removal of the Roman pagan dynasty, just as the apocalyptic beast was to succeed soon after the fall of the Roman pagan dragon. 3. It was to emanate from Satan as a power of his devising, and with the energy of satanic influence attending its establishment, just as the apocalyptic beast was a device and creation of the dragon, or the devil. Remember, he gets his power from the dragon. That had before ruled in Roman paganism and received from him its throne and power and great authority. 4. Its manifestation was to be with signs and lying wonders, just like those with which the two-horned lamb-like beast and false prophet was to support the authority of the Revelation sea beast. 5. It was to arise out of, and then to head, the great apostasy, enforcing a system of spiritual falsehood called the deceivableness of unrighteousness and mystery of iniquity, and with such success that all would believe it except they who had the love of the truth and were heirs of salvation, just as the apocalyptic beast was to be the supporter of the apostate harlot church that had mystery written on her forehead, to head the pseudo-Christian of the outer temple, to head the pseudo-Christians of the outer temple court, and by his ministers to deceive them that dwelt on the earth. And this with success such that all living there would worship him, whose names were not written in the Lamb's book of life. 6. It was to be an ecclesiastical power, the temple of God, or Christian church, being the grand scene of his ostentation and pride, just as the apocalyptic beast was to have a false prophet for his chief minister, and Daniel's little horn to be an ecclesiastical overseer or bishop of the church, having eyes like the eyes of a man. 7. Its character was to be emphatically that of the opposer of Christ's cause and people, also of the lawless one, or above laws, also the affecter of superhuman self-exaltation above all authorities and dignities of the world, and this on the blasphemous assumption of being himself as God, in the same way as the beast of Daniel and the Revelation was to war against the saints and overcome them, to think to change times and laws, a domineer over the 10 kings as subjects, and to have a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies against God, his name, his tabernacle, and them also that dwelt in heaven. 8. It would continue until Christ's second coming, and then by the brightness of his coming to be destroyed and annihilated, just as Daniel's little horn was to continue to the coming of the Ancient of Days, and then to be destroyed and given to the burning flame, just again as the apocalyptic beast with his false prophet was to be cast alive into the lake of fire on the manifestation of him that is King of kings and Lord of lords, and thereupon, as Daniel relates, the Son of Man to take the kingdom, or as in the Revelation 20 millenary, to begin the reign of Christ with his saints. Such are the resemblances, and well do they justify the early fathers in unanimously interpreting the person or power meant by St. Peter under the title of the man of sin in this prophecy as the very same with Daniel's little horn and the apocalyptic beast, or rather its ruling head, from the abyss and sea. It only remains to show 3. The identity, agreeably with the unanimous judgment of the same ancient fathers, of this so often predicted enemy of Christ himself and of his church, with the Antichrist of the Apostle John. The 4 passages in which the word occurs I append as before below, and the following observations, some of which have been already anticipated at the very beginning of this work, are all that will be needed on them. 1. The hostile person or power intended by St. John is spoken of as one that had been previously made known and talked of among the Christians, as the one preeminently great enemy, not one of 2, that was to come, a characteristic which suffices itself almost to identify it with Daniel's little horn and St. Paul's man of sin. 2. The name, then new and very singular name, which he gave it under divine inspiration of Antichrist, while admitting in one particular point of view the secondary sense of an adversary of Christ as a rival Christ, not otherwise, moreover primarily indicate, according to the etymological formation of the word, we shall soon see the exceeding importance of the remark, that he would be so through his being, in some manner a vice Christ, or one professedly assuming the character, occupying the place, and fulfilling the functions of Christ, a representation which well consisted with St. Paul's statement to the Thessalonians that the enemy he prophesied of would, in the Christian church, show himself as God. That is, supposing that the church, though apostatized, might have retained the dogma of Jesus Christ's divinity. 3. St. John's declaration that the spirit of Antichrist, and indeed many Antichrists, were even then in the world, with reference to teachers like Simon Magus and other Gnostics who propounded that Jesus Christ had not come in the flesh, but only as a phantasm, thus doing away alike with his propitiatory atonement by death, and with his fitness as the ascended God-man to act the part of mediator with the Father for his disciples and, through the Spirit sent forth by him from heaven, to guide them into all truth, his functions as the great prophet and mediator being thereupon arrogated to themselves by these teachers, as if, in his stead, the divinely appointed dispensers of wisdom unto salvation. I say, St. John's statement of this early and partial development in them of the spirit and acts of Antichrist was certainly not meant by him to represent it as a completed and plenary fulfillment of the prophecy. If the language here used might at all seem dubious, the undoubted future bearing of the other earlier and parallel prophecies just alluded to, and also of his own subsequent and similarly parallel apocalyptic prophecy of the anti-Christian beast, decisively negatives a supposition. What he states as then passing in the world of the spirit and acts of Antichrist was but to the same effect as St. Paul's previous declaration that the mystery of iniquity did even then already work. That earlier prophecy, so far as regarded the predicted man of sin, was evidently left intact, as still unfulfilled and in force. And while the fact that the master spirit of evil was already setting up imperfect antichrists as his agents for deceiving men, just as in olden time he had simply set up anti-gods, is noted by St. John as showing that it was now the last time, or time of the last dispensation. Yet he leaves it here clearly to be understood that the person or power preeminently and above all others anti-Christian, and preeminently the usurper of Christ's place, functions, and prerogatives was still to come. We got to number 4 here, speaking of the Antichrist and the identity of the last ruling head of the Revelation sea beast, with the little horn of Daniel's 4th beast, with St. Paul's man of sin, and with St. John's Antichrist. That's our heading. 4. The declaration that this great Antichrist, like his precursors, would deny the Father and the Son, is explained by St. John himself and by other scriptures, in such a sense as not to interfere with the view just set forth of the force of the prophetic appellative Antichrist, it meaning not the atheistic denial of God, which could indeed in no wise be charged on the contemporary Gnostics, of whom nevertheless John speaks as Antichrist, but a denial as to the practical effect total and as the very essence of the system. Such was very much the view given by many of the fathers, whether in reference to the prophecies of Daniel, St. Paul, or St. John. They speak of the grand enemy, therein alike prefigured, not as an atheist so much, but rather as one who, while professing Christianity, would be a usurper of Christ's place before the world. And soon the appellative in St. John became of all others the most famous, so that from age to age the expectation was revived and expressed of some awful usurper of Christ's place and function appearing, some false Christ, pseudo-vicar of Christ, Antichrist. So we close our analysis and parallelisms of this memorable tetrad of prophecies on the great Antichrist, nor let the reader pass on without running briefly over them retrospectively and considering what a mass of circumstance they present, touching this intended anti-Christian power, most singular and definite as to time, place, office, character, rule, duration, etc. All these I shall hope to show fulfilled in the papacy, that power which, on evidence not slender, albeit less specific than we are now called to examine into, I have already, in the progress of my comment, been led presumptively to suspect and hold up as the Antichrist, and certainly if its history and character be found to answer to all the particulars and circumstances here set forth, the conclusion must be most sure that our solution is indeed the true one. The papacy is the man of sin, the Antichrist, the little horn of Daniel, that last head of the 4th apocalyptic or sea beast of Revelation. And you can find this if you go to horeapocalypticae.wordpress.com. You get to this WordPress site here, and if you scroll down, you'll see volume 1, 2, and 3. Also, if you'd like to purchase these, you can see volume 1 is here, and at that purchase page you can find those written copies. But like I said, everything is here, so it's free. You don't have to buy a hard copy if you want. Everything I have is free online and available for anyone. If you want it printed, though, they got guys with printing presses. That's what the links are there for. Okay, so if you go to volume 3, and there's a table of contents for volume 3, and you can see as I'm going through and editing volume 3 right now for this final print and final edition. So volume 1 and 2 of these here are published already. 3 is I'm working on, and I just finished this chapter, and you'll find section 2 we went over. So there it is for you to look at. If you click on that, they turn red when they're posted. So you can see that's as far as I've got. And if you sign up for the blog, there should a follow button should show up somewhere there. And follow it. And every time I post something, you'll get every time I post another chapter, you'll get a notification. But I am getting to the point, though, where I am going to add some additional sections to comment on some things that, because, well, as I've stated before, that I have a vantage point that E.B. Elliott didn't have, and that is another 150 years of history has followed since he finished that great work. Everything he did up to that point was great, but on some things he had to speculate, or had not become obvious yet in the history where he was. I'm sure if he was here today, we'd have some lively conversations, and together we would come to a even better agreement or understanding than either of us have at this point. But I am grateful to God for the work that he did. It put me light years ahead on all that history, all that research he did without a computer. Yeah, imagine that. So anyway, you're listening to Across the Border, our Prophecy Reality Edition. So I'd like you to go to my website, that is crosstheborder.org. Make sure you subscribe there and share as many of the articles that you find interesting there by whatever method you have of sharing them, social media, and that type of thing.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.